So I read the whole thing, and it was one of those things you read. I don't know how you guys read the paper, but I like to share. When I get with something, I either snap a picture and send it to my team, or I have to read it out loud to anyone that's within listening range. And I read this whole thing like that. I was gobsmacked. And I wonder, Nick, if you could start with, we have plenty of time, so just take me through what stood out to you.
Well, look, the overall picture here, which I think is really fascinating. First of all, it's an inside look at what the top people at Fox, the primetime hosts, the executives, the Murdochs, Suzanne Scott, were thinking and saying about these allegations in the moment after the election, when their viewers were angry and wishing President Trump had won re-election, and their political reporting staff was trying to tell their viewers, no, he did not. And what you see in these texts is essentially a network that is afraid of its own audience, afraid to tell them the truth, and extremely conscious of the trade-off that if their network tells the truth about what happened, that they will lose viewers. And the one that really jumped out to me, I gotta tell you, was the three-way group chat with the primetime host, Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, and Laura Ingraham, talking about trying to get a White House reporter for Fox fired. This was Carlson's text, to call Suzanne Scott and get her fired for the crime of tweeting a link to a report from the Trump administration itself saying that the voting machines had not been tampered with, that there was no evidence. They wanted her fired for that. Why? Because the stock price was going down, which makes me wonder how much these people are paid in corporate stock for their compensation, by the way. But that was the essential thing. The stock price is going down. Fire her for telling the truth.
Yeah, I'm going to read that. I have that part of the filing, but I just want to, for folks at home who don't know who all these people are. So Rupert Murdoch obviously sits at the top. Suzanne Scott sits atop Fox News. Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, and Sean Hannity are the prime anchors in question here. And the lawsuit names names and brings receipts for everyone that I've mentioned, all the way down to the decision desk, the fact checkers, and the fact-checking department. I'm going to read, Nick, that section from the filing that you just talked about. In their group text thread, this is Hannity, Ingraham, and Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson pointed Hannity to a tweet by Fox reporter Jackie Heinrich. She was fact-checking a tweet by Trump that mentioned Dominion, and specifically mentioned Hannity's and Dobbs' broadcast that evening discussing Dominion. Heinrich correctly fact-checked the tweet, pointing out that the top election infrastructure officials said that, quote, there is no evidence that any voting system deleted or lost votes, changed votes, or was in any way compromised. Tucker Carlson told Sean Hannity, quote, please get her fired. Seriously, what the F? I'm actually shocked. It needs to stop immediately. It needs to stop immediately. Like tonight, it's measurably hurting the company. The stock price is down. Not a joke. So Nick, importantly, what does happen? I mean, what does happen is all these people they describe as lunatics flood their airwaves, and they make an aggressive grab to grab their voters back from Newsmax.
Yeah, you saw on certain shows first, Maria Bartiromo and Lou Dobbs, you saw a huge promotion of the conspiracy theories of Sidney Powell and later Mike Lindell on Tucker Carlson's show after Sidney Powell was appearing a bit less. And you saw them kind of lean away from their own reporting, their own news side, and start to lean into, and it got more into the news coverage of Fox as well. They started to promote the idea more and more that Trump had won, that there was something wrong, that dead people had voted, that the machines were compromised, all these theories to get their own viewers off the hook for feeling bad about losing, about Trump losing. And what happens after that is actually more important. Look, in a story I did last year, I reported that, around November, a message was delivered by Murdoch to Suzanne Scott, clean house. And what happened after that? Well, Chris Stirewalt, who was a high-ranking politics editor, he was fired. The Washington bureau chief was forcibly retired. And they replaced those people with more pliable people. And from then on, it was pretty clear what the direction of the network was going to be. And we saw that on January 6th. We saw in the aftermath of that, when these hosts spent, especially Carlson, spent a huge amount of time and airtime essentially defending people, their viewers, for believing in the conspiracy theories that they knew to be false, but which had powered the assault on the Capitol. And that's, I think, the most tragic thing of all.
You know, David, it is, I think, an historic infusion of understanding into how the most powerful people at Fox News think. And I, too, was struck by, I mean, with a gun to my head, I would have no idea what this company's stock price was ever on any day. And a little more aware of the ratings, but the notion that anybody would make a programming decision was revelatory to me. I want to read more of Sean Hannity's business concerns about the outcome of the election. From Hannity, in 1 week and one debate, they destroyed a brand that took 25 years to build and damage is incalculable. Serious money with serious distribution could be a real problem. In my honest opinion, they need to address it, but WTF do I know? From Tucker Carlson to a producer, do the executives understand how much credibility and trust we've lost with our audience? We're playing with fire, for real. An alternative like Newsmax could be devastating to us. From Irina Briganti, an executive, our viewers left this week after Arizona. From Porter Berry, an executive, email to ratings analysts, just pulled up Newsmax's show and they're hitting Cavuto. They're just whacking us. It's smart on their part. So just to come back down to planet Earth for a second, our viewers left after Arizona. What happened in Arizona? Joe Biden won. Fox didn't do anything. I mean, the attachment to the delusion is part of the big headline out of this. The attachment to the lie, because their viewers can't handle the truth, because they condition them to believe the lie, and their unawareness of their role in that vicious cycle is staggering.
I think, in a sense, they may well be aware, and yet that isn't the problem or the point. I mean, from pillar to post, you're hearing people declare they have to embrace what their viewers want to hear. I want to pick up on two words you read aloud: credibility and trust. In most news organizations, most outfits that have the word news as part of their title, credibility and trust is inherent in the idea that you're providing authenticated, reliable information to the public that is meaningful to them. In this case, the information was the opposite of authenticated. It was the opposite of reliable. In fact, it was inherently unreliable, and it was identified as such instantaneously by the very people whose shows and whose network was pushing it out most prominently to the public, right? And so what we see here is the talk of brand, the idea of this relationship forged with the audience. What you're not hearing is, except with very faint glimmers here and there, is the idea that you have an obligation to the audience and an obligation to the facts and the truth and fairness. And yes, there are opinions to offer and takes to have. But in reality, if you're saying that Joe Biden won Arizona, and you're saying that Joe Biden won these other swing states, and that the election was won by Joe Biden, you have to find a way to reconcile those facts with your audience. And they simply didn't want to have to do that. You saw Rupert Murdoch, the founder of Fox News, right? The boss at the top of this pyramid, saying at times, you know, is there a way we could get Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, and Tucker Carlson perhaps together to acknowledge that Trump lost this as a way of getting our viewers through this? And Suzanne Scott, the chief executive of Fox News, as portrayed in these legal filings from Dominion, says, you know, we're not going to do it that way, but we're going to find ways to, you know, they're almost there. She says they're there privately, publicly not so much. And Rupert says at one point, it's all very well for Sean Hannity to say this privately to you. What is he telling his viewers? And yet Dominion would also say, even if Rupert Murdoch, you know, at this point, a nonagenarian media baron, is articulating in some way the concern for fact and for reality here, he's also not intervening to make sure it gets done. Right. And so this is a question that you know, our legal colleagues can address in some ways. But from a journalistic standpoint, you're not seeing any adherence to any commonly held notions of where you find trust and credibility in fact and in truth.
I mean, David, there's also an important marker here. I mean, I was, I don't remember if I think I was still a Republican. Obviously, I'd worked on the McCain campaign in 2008, when after the election, Fox News didn't challenge the results of President Obama's victory. They started challenging the entire agenda. What is represented here is a real, you know, lowering of the discourse to not accepting the results of an election and not having the courage or the backbone or the confidence in the entire network to deliver an accurate result of a national presidential election. Where do we go from there?
Well, I mean, you saw the chief executive of Fox lash out privately in communications with colleagues about Bill Salmon, the Washington managing editor of Fox News for being part of the team that projected before any other news network that Joe Biden would win Arizona. And from there, the die was kind of cast for the Trump campaign, as they well knew that night on election night. And she said she's doing terrible damage here. Tucker Carlson called it vandalism. What he did was make the best call he could to inform his viewers, their audience, of the facts as they were playing out. The chief executive of the network was outraged by this. It tells you something about the dissonance of what the claimed values are. They had reporters, Eric Shawn and others were saying in real time, look, let me offer you the evidence that disproves a lot of these conspiracy theories as they're even unspooling basically on the air. Fox News journalists were trying hard to do that. Neil Cavuto pulled away from a briefing at the White House by Haley McEnany, then White House spokeswoman, that was offering baseless allegations of voter fraud because he said this hasn't been substantiated. We can't rely on it. We can come back to it if we can take a look at what she has to say. And he was excoriated. Neil Cavuto has been there for, a million years, pretty much from the outset. He's a pillar of that network. For him to be trashed for basically saying, I want to make sure we're providing our viewers with reliable information tells you about the point at which Fox found itself.